Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Conant Show, and kind of in a serious mood tonight. There's a lot of thoughts I want to get to tonight. We're going out live, Woodstock TV, 56 Rock City Road, and thank you, Paula Gloria Barton, for teching for me and always making a seamless show. So we're going out live here. We let the previous clip continue to run into my slot a little bit here, my time slot, because it's a related subject matter. It's a very important subject matter, and we didn't want to interrupt the thought there that was going on. So, the past few weeks has been illuminating in a number of ways. There's amongst my friends and acquaintances and other fellow TV producers, we're all embroiled in a variety of legal battles, and the similarities between these very on the surface of things different looking cases actually are starting to really show the common procedure and practice that debilitates our rights and freedoms and protections. So it's become quite a fascinating journey into this realm. Of trying to use the system to use the system, the legal system, to protect ourselves from the big bad monsters. So I have a guest here tonight. Steve Romine has just popped in the door, so you're going to have to give us a moment here to get another microphone up and another chair together. And we're going to get right to it. Should we turn the table around or just leave it alone? We could just leave it be.
Hi, George.
Steve. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, too.
All right. Yep. All right, yeah, this is live TV, folks.
Live TV, community TV.
Yeah, it's fine. All right, so just to help lead in to the thought tonight, Steve's joining me because he has actually quite a bit of expertise in understanding frequencies. And that was kind of, as I was noodling over what I wanted to do tonight in the past 48 hours, I wanted to work with the idea of frequencies, what frequencies mean and what they are, and the nature of them. And I'd like to open the thought with a spiritual side of things, and that is, in a lot of creation stories, and specifically the Judeo-Christian one, there is this idea that in the beginning there was the Word. In other words, in the beginning there was sound. It was sound. It was a vibration that called matter into existence. And with that idea, every form of matter, every element, every living creature, every DNA strand, every gene in a DNA strand has a frequency. It's called a resonant frequency. I've used this example before. It's a very famous example. I think it's from the 1950s. There's this opera singer, and she's singing a pitch, and there's this crystal wine glass on the table, and when she gets the pitch just right, the crystal wine glass basically explodes. And what this demonstration was showing is that glass, that crystal glass, has its own tone. It has its own resonant frequency. And anybody who's played a xylophone or a marimba, which is basically the same thing, but one's wooden and one's made out of metal, as you strike each different bar or note, you will get a tone. And that tone will correspond to the density and the length of that metal or wooden bar, for lack of a better word at the moment. I'm not sure quite what they're called. But if you go through the periodic table of elements, you will find that each element has weight, has density, atomic weight, molecular weight, density, and each element will have its own sound, its own resonant frequency. And if you move into other ranges of reality, construction, or let's talk about light for a moment. The different colors, each color in light. When we think of white light, we've all learned this in our high school science class, earth sciences and such. That the prism will take white light and break it into its component parts, and we will see a rainbow of colors. And when we see a rainbow out there in nature, you're getting the refraction of light, the sunlight, through the mist of water, in an opportune situation where the rains are just right in the right location and the sun is at a right location to illuminate these refractive qualities of the mist and shows us the rainbow, which is very much similar to a prism breaking white light into its component parts of the different colors. Now, each color has a frequency. It has a vibration. So at a certain point, light and sound are very, very closely related. And then there are realms of light that are invisible to the naked eye. And it's on either end of the spectrum that is visible, going lower and slower or going higher and faster. We can't see into these realms because of our mechanical construction of our eyes. When you start going into these higher frequencies, they become useful. Well, even the visible light spectrum is useful for the conductivity of information. And that's where I'd like to invite Steve to jump in with some thoughts on where I'm going with this. What do you?
Yeah, well, George is right on, and elaborating on what he was saying. Arthur Furstenberg, who is one of the pioneers in activism against being irradiated by all these different frequencies or wavelengths, and he's been doing it for years. He has put together a great book that everybody should read, and it's called The Invisible Rainbow. It's called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. Actually, it's called Invisible Rainbow, Electricity and Life.
Your finger's on his name.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
There you go. Oh, let's get it. So there you go. This book just came out. It's brand new. He just published it. It's hot off the press. You can get it at just stopsmartmeters.org. Stopsmartmeters.org, or if you go online, they have it, or you can get it at Amazon. But I would support stopsmartmeters.org and get the book. It's a little more, but you're supporting a really good cause. Anyway, this book will explain it all to you in a lot of different ways. And when I'm done with it, I'm going to lend it to George.
Yeah.
And George is going to lend it to Paula.
Yeah.
And we're all going to read it because it's incredible. Now, one thing I want to say about the wavelengths that George is referring to, we can say wavelengths or frequencies. Susan Clark, who is a PhD, I believe, and has been in studying this stuff for 30 years, and speaking out for 30 years, and being in the FCC meetings, and being a government, researching and battling with government officials who were pushing this stuff on the public. She says to call it wavelengths. So we're talking about the same thing. When we're talking about wavelengths of frequencies, it's the same thing. But what I want to point out to everybody, and this is really an incredible thing, years ago, I don't know if it was in the 50s, George, but Schumann, and I forget his first name, Schumann discovered that the Earth had a resonance, or a frequency, or a wavelength. And that frequency was around 7.8, somewhere in that general vicinity. I don't have the exact number, but it was 7.8. The Earth was actually giving off
a tone.
Yeah. And, the Native Americans knew it all along.
Yeah.
And other sages knew it. But the Earth gives off this wavelength that can be measured. And it's 7.8 hertz. And what they discovered, I think it was in the 70s, that the brain, the human body, gives off a frequency, especially the brain. Mm-hmm. And that turns out that you've got to know that there's millions of wavelengths and frequencies, millions. And guess what, folks? The human body gives off the exact wavelength, exact frequency as the Earth.
As the Schumann resonance.
It's the Schumann resonance is exactly the same, which is the Earth's resonance, is exactly the same as the human body, which makes sense because we, all our materials come from the Earth. But the point is, that should tell you something, and that demonstrated to me how right on the Native Americans are with how we are of the Earth and how we are one with the Earth. And the frequencies point that out, George, don't you? What'd you say?
Well, absolutely. But, to sort of strengthen that thought, information comes to me and many of us, in the strangest of ways. And I was attending an AA meeting out in a place called Gowanda, New York, which was very close to the Seneca Indian Nation territory of Cattaraugus. And while I was there, you have a little break maybe during the meeting and, opportunity to smoke a cigarette and have a coffee and chit-chat with people. And I got to talking to a fellow who was a scientist who had, gotten in trouble with drinking and driving and found himself remanded to a 12-step program. And so we got to talking about things. And one of the things that he brought up was the specific gene that governs the construction of your fingernail is the same gene that governs the construction of cellulose in a pine tree, and it's the exact same gene, interchangeable as the cellulose that goes into the construction of the shell of a shrimp. He says it's the exact same gene, absolutely the same, interchangeable. And that was so mind-blowing to me because, we're talking, bottom of the ocean, a shrimp, a tree, and my fingernail are composed of the same genetic information. And the native teachings are very, very clear that all life is related. That, the deer are considered our cousins or our brothers and sisters. We regard everything in this philosophy as our relatives. And science has, come along and borne it out. Well, yes, indeed, anything with DNA on this planet, earthly DNA, is related. Much of it is completely interchangeable. And this is between whole orders of life, whether it be plant, animal, insect, and so on. So these ancient teachings often carry a lot of science in them, but the language, because of the time, thousands of years, and culture, will probably by necessity have to encode these scientific concepts which end up sounding like myth, or just interesting stories. And so we have a lot, in other words, I guess to follow up Steve's thought, is we have a lot to learn from native communities, be them Native American or Native African or Native Irish or Native Italian or Native Chinese. These old stories, these old pieces of information come from times of great antiquity where our ancestors were very likely dealing with the same issues we are today. And that is, advanced technology in the hands of humans. You want to jump in on something?
Yeah, well, George is talking about these advanced technologies, and that is a good point to bring up, because I actually wanted to talk about that as I was sitting here thinking about what am I going to say next. And that was what I was actually wanting to jump to. So George read my mind. And thing that people need to understand is that the body is a bioelectrical system, and it operates with electricity. There is all this on a micro scale. There's all this cellular, electrobiological cellular signaling that's going on. It's actually electromagnetic wavelengths that are being transmitted by the body on a micro scale between the cells to order it to do something, to make the next move that it needs to make to keep the system operating properly. Now, as those signals are being given off and transmitted within the body, then we have these technologies that are in place that were not here before. We always had electromagnetic radiation on the Earth, emanating from the Earth and emanating from the sun, but that's static. That's static. These man-made technologies are emitting and transmitting pulsing electromagnetic radiation. It's pulsing. It's the intermittent pulsing that it's not even the same pulse. They're all different. And the body's system automatically goes into a mode that it's being invaded by a toxin. It doesn't recognize it. And the body starts creating all these stress proteins that Dr. Martin Blank from Columbia University has researched for 30 years. Check out his book, Overpowered. And anyway, the point that I wanted to make in all of that is that as our systems are operating on these electromagnetic signals on a microcellular level, in come these frequencies that are very close to the frequencies of our body. That's the thing, especially the cell phone and the Wi-Fi and all of that. It's not like way on another end of the spectrum. It's close to our frequencies. It can interrupt. And so we end up with what's called intercellular signaling disruptors. And that causes a disorder or a cancer or whatever. Besides the DNA damage that's happening from the exposure, which creates micronuclei DNA damage, but it's this disruption. And just one thing further is in Europe, where they didn't have any cell towers. There were no cell towers. And then they put up the cell towers. The women in the community started showing up in the hospitals with breast cancer, because the women are the first, because of the tissue of the breast, there's a lot of moisture, and microwave is attracted to water. And so anything that has a large water content will absorb the microwave radiation more than somebody that has little water content. And so these women were showing up with breast cancers. And they found that all of these women had low levels of melatonin in their system. And they discovered that the cell tower radiation, electromagnetic radiation, was interrupting the production of melatonin, which happens when you go to sleep. As soon as your eye closes, melatonin gets signaled, producing system gets signaled to start making melatonin, and your body gets healed while you're sleeping. So when there's no melatonin, cancer shows up. And so that is the danger from these technologies. And as Susan Clark said, I don't know if you guys read this or in her emails or you heard it on my show, she said, if the wavelength is the same distance, or the dimension of a wavelength is the same as an organ in your body, like let's say it's a 3-inch wavelength or a 2-inch wavelength, then your eye will be more susceptible to absorbing that radiation than a part that has a different dimension. If it has the same dimension, it absorbs it much more. Isn't that something? So anyway, we are playing with fire. You know, not us.
We're not. I think this is kind of one of the themes of the show tonight that I was contemplating was because of our email exchanges in the past 2 days. Let's start calling things what they are. I've always been a big fan of doing that anyway, and it's always gotten me in trouble because I got a big mouth and I say a lot of stuff. But we're talking about these wavelengths, microwave wavelengths, that even in a I don't want to say the word an innocent use of them, but say an uneducated use of these technologies, or a
irresponsible.
Well, I don't want to say irresponsible, but like in a non-combative use. Let's put it that way. In a non-weaponized use of these technologies is still dangerous. I mean, you're still going to. There's a variety of research that's out there. I mean, I grew up, I went to high school in the 1970s, and part of our required reading was, to read about this guy B.F. Skinner and Pavlov and the other behavioral scientists and their research into, kind of pinning down what's going on with behavior and brain waves. Brainwaves, wavelengths, behavior, brainwaves, frequencies, frequency weapons. All right, so as you can see where I'm going with this is that these behavioralists were looking to understand what feelings, what emotions, what thought patterns emit what particular wave form so that they can mimic those signature waves or get a signature of those waves and then mimic them with an oscillator. And then the oscilloscope is the meter that shows you, what that wave looks like. Now, I have a feeling that, Moog synthesizers that came out in the 1970s were all about using an oscilloscope and having a variety of filters and not switches so much, but dials, where you could see the wavelength of a trumpet, okay? Some tone, musical tone, and then by dialing in on this oscillator with the various filters and such, you could shape a sine wave to mimic a violin, a trombone, whatever, a birdie tweet, whatever it is that you were trying to mimic to make a synthesizer sound, okay? So in like fashion, these behavioralists, and this technology is way advanced by now, were doing similar things. They were using various frequency filters to shape the mapped out biological signature of a frequency of, say, fear. That's a good one. They like that. So they have fear as a specific sine wave, and then now they can duplicate that sine wave, and using these frequency technologies and broadcast technologies, broadcast them. And the word here is called entrainment. So in a lot of these behavioral studies, they would have people go into a sleep study, and they would entrain the biological brain waves with synthetic brain waves that would then induce a variety of feelings, thoughts, and so on. So what I'm trying to drive at is that, you know, there's always this impediment. There's always the excuse to not do something, right? And whether in the 1960s to not protest the Vietnam War. Well, I got to go to work. Well, you know, the bills got to get paid. I don't have time. You know, and that same kind of economic pressure is at work. The same social and economic pressures are at work today that keep us, we the people, from really getting active in putting pressure on our political machinery. But also, you know, we have to really call a duck here. We have to put pressure on the law enforcement machinery and the judicial machinery, almost more so than the political machinery, because these guys have the power to do what they will with us, the humans. So, what am I saying? What am I saying is these wavelengths, these frequencies can be tuned to manipulate our thoughts and our feelings.
Right on, George. Yep. That's definitely the case. And actually, if anyone were to look up some of the old declassified research documents from military intelligence, from naval, surface weapon development, you will see, and these are, you know, all revolve around the use of microwave technologies in their weapons. The number one capability, the number one capability of these weapons is behavior modification. That's what they love it, and they're using it. They used it in Iraq. They used it in Iraq, folks. Remember when we had that shock and awe demonstration, and then they had like hundreds of thousands of soldiers surrendering, a huge parade of Iraqi soldiers surrendering because they used microwave technologies on them. And they put them in the fear mode with the frequencies, with the wavelengths. Yeah. And then before that, they used it with women it was a women's march that was against nuclear power. And they used it on them. And those women all got freaked out and experienced being microwaved. And some of them had permanent damage. They're using it in crowd control. They're using it. They can make, that's why we do not want smart meters in our community. Because they can broadcast the signal to a specific frequency, and they can make a whole community become paranoid and agitated. At the same time, they can make everybody become passive and not want to get involved and voice any opposition. You know? So they have been developing these for over 30 years, 50 years probably.
Going back to the 1930s.
And really, when the United States started was, I think it was I don't know did you say the United States was in the 30s? Because what actually happened was in Russia, Russia was beaming microwave radiation onto the U.S. Embassy in Russia, in Moscow. And the ambassadors, and it was cell phone strength radiation, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And we're talking about far-field exposure. There's near-field exposure and there's far-field exposure. When a cell phone's up against your head, that's near-field. It's like about up to 8 inches. After 8 inches, it becomes far-field, like from a cell tower. And they were beaming far-field exposure, cell phone strength radiation, for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And the ambassador came down with leukemia, and other members of the staff came down with cancers. So they replaced them. They didn't know what was going on. They just, these people getting cancer. And then they replaced them. And the next round of people that were replaced, different people, some that didn't get it before now got it, but the next ambassador got leukemia too. And then they did it again. They replaced them. And the third round of people all came down with the ambassador leukemia and multiple cancers among the staff. And after about a year, this all happened within a year, they realized, somehow they figured it out. The U.S. realized they were being bombarded with microwave radiation, cell phone strength. So, you know what they did? They didn't tell anybody. They let it go on for 10 years, and they used it as their own experiment too. So the Russians were watching what was happening, trying to affect decisions in the embassy, and the United States was using it. And after 10 years, they told them what was happening, and that was big of them because they gave everybody danger pay. They all got danger pay. If you want to check out this story further,
I've read about it. Yeah.
Go to U.S. Embassy in Moscow radiated / another perspective, and they knew way back then the harm that it causes. And look at what they're doing. It's unbelievable that they're...
No, what era was that? 1970s, 1980s?
I think that was somewhere between the 50s and the 70s.
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay,
yeah.
Sure. Yeah, 60s.
So probably, it wasn't, of course they weren't using cell phones. It was cell phone strength radiation. Cell phones were invented for the Vietnam War. That's what cell phones, they were specifically invented for. One thing I want to get across to everybody, because I like to say this a lot, people, when you realize this, it'll all make sense. It's radar, folks. It's all radar.
The first microwave oven was called the radar range.
The Amana radar range. And I was telling a guy about it. I went and measured his house. You know Giovanni? Mm-hmm. Giovanni? In what town? Giovanni, I hope you're listening out there. Giovanni, I went to measure his house, and I told him about the radar and everything. And I said, what was the first microwave oven called? And he says, I don't know. I said, it's the Amana radar range. He says, wait a minute. And he went in his garage, and he says, this is what we just pulled out of the house. And he gave me an Amana radar range. I have it in my garage. It's a collector's item. It says radar range, folks. It's radar. And they discovered it because the soldiers were warming up in front of the radar on the boats. And they also discovered the chocolate was melting in their pockets. So they said, you know what, we can make money with this. The generals, when they figured out what was going on, and they put it into the marketplace, and the first thing they came out with was the Amana radar range. But then they realized, the PRs, advertisers realized, I think it's better to call it little microwaves and not radar, because everybody knows radar is harmful. Not really,
But we do now.
Yeah, we do now.
Yeah, well, to give you a little insight into a story about a battleship, and a friend of mine who is the head welder on that battleship, he was the lead man of his team, and they had very high prestige on the ship because they were the ones who would weld the ship together in the event there was a hole blown into the side of it. So they were a very important bunch, and he was telling me that there would be times where they would have to sweep the decks clean of the seagulls who got in front of the radar array, because the radar array would make them explode, burst into flames, and hit the deck as quivering, shaking animals that had just been, nuked by these radar emanations, these broadcasts. So the aggressiveness of radar in terms of its use for long-range, detection is not to be trifled with. This stuff is really, really aggressive and damaging to living tissue.
And toxic.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it makes a bird explode, I would say that's pretty
that's
toxic.
more than toxic.
Yeah.
It's
John Jordan worked in radar at the Air Force.
and something that I think a noteworthy thing. Let me see. I just had it about the radar. Is that how they discovered all this radiation. First of all, like I said, there's always been electromagnetic radiation frequencies and wavelengths on the Earth. We've always had it, but it's static, and the animals are used to it. They're in the middle of it, and then in 1945. They introduced radar. Now, radar is microwave technology. In case we didn't make that clear, that's what radar is. It's microwave technology. When you have a phone against your head, listening to your cell phone, you are radiating your head. The reason they call it radiation is because it's radar. They got radar from radiation. So the point is that they discovered. A scientist, a researcher, discovered that bugs looked like they were doing dances, or actually they were aphids, and they were on the big leaves, and it looked like they wasn't sure if they were doing a mating dance or what kind of dance they were doing, and he examined it, and then he researched it further, and he timed it and he measured it, and he found out that the dance that they were doing was exactly the pulse of the radar from a radar station 14 miles away. Every time it made the sweep and it came around, they did a little dance because it was affecting them. The plants, the animals, the people were all getting affected. Dr. Ole Johansson has said that the background radiation that we all live in, and we're not talking about just the Wi-Fi by itself.
Cosmic.
Yeah, it's the background radiation that we live in, which was always static, and now it's mixed with pulsing radiation, has increased a quadrillion times since 1945. That's the increase. These are small fractions when they were originally. So the quadrillion, it's not a quadrillion hertz. It's a fraction that has increased a quadrillion times. And now we're going to get they want to saturate us with 5G. So people need to stand up. We got to oppose this stuff. We got to let them know we're not giving our consent. We demand you stop this. People have to engage. People have to educate themselves, listen to this show, read this book, do your own research, go online, watch the videos on it, but learn, because this is what's happening to us now. We need to get educated and we need to get active.
On that note, I was, meditating on more information about frequency and resonant frequency and disease. Specifically, every pathogen has its own resonant frequency, including every kind of a tumor has its own resonant frequency. The DNA that governs the life of any structure, whether it's a parasite or not, or a complex living creature or a simple creature, has these resonant frequencies or wavelengths. And in some of this research, again, how did this information get to me? Weird ways. I happen to be acquainted with and friendly with an NSA colonel in the 1990s, 80s and 90s. And he was, sharing some of the things that were being cooked up in the lab, and that is using radio frequencies or radiations to mimic the resonant frequency of a disease. Disease X, disease Y, doesn't matter what it is. They had a whole bunch of them. And what they could do, say they wanted to give somebody pancreatic cancer, they could target an individual, and with these long, what would you call that? Long range, microwave, so there's up close and then there's far away.
Oh, far field and near field.
All right, so they can use far field microwave technology to target an individual, and whatever the particular ailment is that they're targeting with this person with, the frequency inside the body would actually self-assemble from proteins in the body, the disease, whether it's a bacteria or a virus or a cancer, and the actual pathogen, even though it's not, or a contagion even though it's not present in the air or the person hasn't been physically exposed to that specific contagion, the contagion can be brought into existence by the frequency pulling the electrons and then molecules together to actually create a disease, and then you would get the disease.
So it can induce epidemics?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, if anybody wants to find out more detail about what George was just speaking about, go to this website. Google this. No, don't Google anything. DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo. D-U-C-K, go. Nothing gets tracked on DuckDuckGo. Okay? So go to that search engine on your computer, and then in the search window of DuckDuckGo, type in death, mutations, and lies. The military knew all along about the dangers of microwave exposure. If you probably just type in death, mutation, and lies, the military knew all along, you will come up with the page. It is an incredible page. I sent it to you guys, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, I did. I sent it to you last night.
Okay.
And it's an incredible page with a lot of information about everything George was just speaking about. And I'm going to quote Admiral Byrd. No, not Admiral Byrd that you're thinking of. He's in the Navy, but he's a research scientist. His last name is Byrd, and B-Y-R-D. And this researcher for the military was bragging at a press conference, and he said that we can cause diseases and we can cure diseases with microwave technology. And he also said, just like George was saying, we can entrain a person's brain from across the room and we can cause seizures with power densities that can't even be detected. They can't even be detected. So it's not about strength of signal. Yeah. Yeah. Can't detect it. It's because that has a power density, and it's the power density is so small, but the frequency is the exact right frequency to cause the condition. Now, when I was living in my home, the house that I'm living now, we measured that house with my high-frequency analyzer, and it didn't, inside the house, it didn't register anything that caused us to say, hey, look at what we got. When we were outside with the meter, we got readings, but inside the house, we didn't get any. And we measured with the microsurge meter, the dirty electricity in the house. It was all low. I took the meter off my house to spare my partner another stroke. And 2 weeks after I took it off, all the physical ailments that were plaguing me and worrying me, I had 3 big ones, I had heart palpitations, thought I was going to have a stroke. A heart attack sooner or later. Thank God I didn't. I had muscle spasms. I'm talking about scary muscle spasms that would wake me up in the middle of the night from a dead sleep. I'd grab my leg and wonder, how long is that going to last? And, it's just like, is it going to break? The tissue going to tear? Because that's how it was scary. And then it would go away. And then it wouldn't happen for 3 or 4 days. But the biggest one was the severe neck pain that I took ibuprofens day and night, morning and night for a year and a half. 400 in the morning, 400 at night. Worst thing you can do, folks. Don't do that. But I was in a lot of pain. I didn't want to go to the doctor. And when I took that meter off for her, as soon as I got that meter out of there, 2 weeks after I got it out, I said, hey, Raji, I don't have any more pain. No more neck pain. And I haven't had any Charlie horses and no heart palpitations in 4.5 years since that meter's been off my house. So it was putting out frequencies that can cause harm. Yeah. And I couldn't even measure them.
Yeah. Earlier today, when Paul and I were driving to the station here, she had reminded me of a story I had told her about when I was about 18 years old. I was riding my bicycle around Rockland County, and one of the big, right off Oak Tree Road in Orangeburg, there's this big, I think it was Simon & Schuster, but I'm not sure if it was them, but it was a big publishing house, had a warehouse. And this great empty parking lot, and I'm on my little my Raleigh 10-speed, and doing figure eights, and I notice an older a black gentleman smoking a cigarette by the door. So I pedal over to him and I say, hey, is it okay if, do you mind if I, just do figure eights in your parking lot? And he said, no, it's actually quite good of you to ask permission. That's pretty cool, So we got to talking to each other about different things. And
was it a motorcycle?
No, it was just a 10-speed bicycle.
Okay.
And this really lovely gentleman, he says, my great grandfather was a shaman or medicine man from Africa, and he was captured and sold into slavery, and landed here in the New World in North America, and had a legacy of knowledge that he passed down to that came all the way to his generation, and a piece of that he shared with me that day, which was, he said, the one thing that we're told in our family is to not be persuaded by anything new and shiny. Just because it's a new gadget and it's shiny, don't think that it hasn't been invented before. Nothing is new under the sun. Absolutely nothing. It's all been done before many, many times on this planet and many, many other planets. So technology is nothing new. Don't get sucked in by it. Stay true to your earth-based traditional knowledge. How to grow food, how to all the how-to-do for yourself stuff that's basically outlawed information now. If you know how to take care of yourself, well, you're an outlaw. If you know the way things are going. So. This impacted Paula in a big way to think that, gosh, we're just really kind of re-experiencing. We just have forgotten, that this has all been done before, and that kind of ties into when you started the show with me tonight. That the Native Americans have a lot of wisdom, a lot of good information that we could really benefit by as far as cures for our civilization's ills, and that is what leads me to this thought. As I got older and found myself drawn into, by really magical circumstances, living with the Senecas and the Mohawks through the late 1970s until recently. I mean, I still visit my friends up there.
Where?
Along the St. Lawrence River and a place called Akwesasne.
In New York?
Yeah, Mohawk territory. Anyway, I got privy to a lot of neat stories. And a lot of these stories point to a catastrophic failure of civilization scale. And all of these stories are always very grim. And when you have infrastructure failure on a civilization scale, things go to shit in a hurry, folks. Things get bad fast. And what the real pressure point is your food and water and sanitation. When you're talking, let's just say New York City, 9, 12 million people, whatever's in the greater New York area, 30 million people, 40 million people in a 30 square mile or a 30 mile radius, northern New Jersey, Connecticut, southern corner of New York, Long Island, Manhattan. This is a very dense population area, somewhere on the order of 40 million people there. Food's got to get in. They got to get the food in there. There's a lot of food has to come in there every day. Every day. Year in and year out to feed all these people. And what these old stories talked about is, for example, the Iroquois peoples as a language stock, right? The Haudenosaunee, Mohawks, Senecas, Cayugas, Onondagas. I'm forgetting one of them. These nations have an oral tradition, a history of having arrived to this area from a catastrophic civilization failure in Central America. These peoples are Mayans. They're descendants of the Mayan peoples who had got out of Dodge when things got really bad. And it was because they had involved themselves with extremely advanced technology, and this advanced technology turned against them, and they also had wars because of food scarcity. Their infrastructure failed. They couldn't get the food production together. They were meat dependent. And a drought came along, wiped out the feed for the critters. The critters died. The humans ended up eating each other. Human sacrifice was partly to provide meat because they were a meat-eating people. And several bands over 100 years, 300 years, however long, this civilization catastrophe was a long, drawn-out, horrible thing. And they made an exodus north and finally found a place to sit in what is now today New York State and surrounds. And, that's why, between this elderly black man saying there's nothing new under the sun, technology's been here on many planets. This is coming from his great-great-great-grandfather, an African shaman who was sold into slavery, right? Telling us in this generation, don't believe it, it's all bullshit, it's all been done before, you haven't invented anything. What does this say? This says is that we are looking at civilization scale failure on a high technology basis. It can get real ugly real fast, and that's why I'm telling you folks, smarten up in a hurry. We don't need smart meters, we need smart brains, and we need to start really talking to each other and coordinating a plan for survival of our planet. I mean, this is not local, this is global, but we have to act locally.
Yeah, right on, George. And I just want to suggest to everybody out there, go to YouTube and watch the movie Resonance, Beings of Frequency. Resonance, Beings of Frequency. It's on YouTube. It's a great, great movie and has a lot of information we were talking about here. Thanks for having me on, George.
Oh man, thanks for coming out and
Sure, well,
and
come and
not
support you.
making me have to do the whole thing.
Come and support
And,
you.
yeah, what, as a parting shot, you know, there is a spiritual dimension to this, and one of the most horrifying thoughts, and it's not just a thought because it is actually a program, is that our actual spiritual energy is also being mapped and can be contained, wiped out, all kinds of things, and now we're like approaching, you know, where it's kind of like where voodoo meets Dr. Evil, and these are very real things. You know, each of us have a vibration, each of us have a spiritual tuning, and these microwave technologies can actually interrupt our spiritual construct. And with that thought, let's get more spiritual, folks, and start thinking and being better about it. Thank you for watching Conant Show. Anything else?
No. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me on, George.
All right. Thank you, Paula Gloria Barton, for teching for us, and tune in again next week, everybody. This is Woodstock TV, Woodstock, New York.
Yeah.
Plug the book.
And also get this book. If you want to know more about all of this, get this book. It's called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. Thank you. Good night, folks.
All right. Good show. Yeah, I'll take that.